Synth Design Podcast. Today is the 10th episode. This is a special one with Tony Rolando from Make Noise. I'm a huge fan of their work, and it's not really because of the sound. I know it's music and synthesizers are all about sound, but for me, it's the whole package that makes this company very, very unique. The way they decide to combine things together and the way they flesh out it to the interface is very mindful of a very particular user. It's a very artistic user that wants to explore and doesn't really care about the manual particularly. It reminds me of, and maybe I'm dozing off to something completely different here, but it reminds me of how cameras changed the way that artists started painting. So if you think about the 17th century, for instance, am I doing this now? If you think about Frans Hals, for instance, he would make money off of making portraits of people around him. This was the 17th century in the Netherlands, and it was the golden era. And people could afford just buying a picture of themselves. This would be very exciting. But then what happens when, in the 19th century, the camera is being introduced? Artists had to shift from what they do, which is very interesting because they didn't really have to work for someone. They could just work for themselves and make wild things. If you look, for instance, at Francis Bacon, he could just make whatever he wanted. He did not have to create things exactly like they are in real life. And this is very interesting because it is based on a Velázquez painting from the 17th century. Is it 17th century? It's not 17th century. It is 17th century. What I'm trying to say is that he was not constrained to, I have to make something look like reality. I can make an impact by just being expressive with it. Now, why is this related to synthesizers? And that is a bit of a stretch, but if you think about it, in the 60s, when Bob Moog had to come up with a Mini Moog, he designed this interface that's supposed to be as clear as possible for musicians who are not really experienced with electronics or don't really know how to operate a modular synth, to make it really easy for them to understand how they can shape their own sound. So back then, you had to be very straightforward with your design, although some would say that Don Buchla did not do that. And obviously, Tony is inspired by Don Buchla, and he's discussing this a bit in the conversation. If you look at Make Noise instruments, they're not really constrained to, like, this has to be super clear from the get-go. They're like question marks to sort of give you a hint to explore. This does not have to be perfect, or like, what is even perfect? And that is what I find really exciting and inspiring in this, because I really feel like the future of designing instruments, and especially standalone instruments, should go to this direction of just being free and making instruments that should surprise you and at the same time inform you when you actually understand them. Anyway, this was way too long. Without further ado, Tony Rolando from Make Noise. This is the synthux.academy, the Synth Design Podcast.
I like having a notebook. Like you said, it's sometimes whenever I get a new project started, I grab a notebook, and that notebook kind of becomes the notebook for that project. You know what I mean? Like that way, it's like, like if you're working on multiple things, which I usually am having, 3 or 4 different projects going at once. If they're in separate notebooks, I think that maybe makes it a little easier. I can grab, if I have an idea, I know to grab that notebook for that idea, and this notebook is where that idea would go. Otherwise, at one point I was just using one big notebook, and everything was just kind of all jumbled up into this like big mess of notes, and like things were kind of cross-pollinating, and maybe that's cool sometimes, but most of the time it just meant a lot of extensive searching for that note amongst notes that I didn't need to see, or drawings that I didn't need to see. So I started kind of compartmentalizing by having like a dedicated notebook
right
for that project.
So then you work with a bunch of notebooks, and this is really from start to end. What kind of things are going on paper?
All of the initial, since we're talking mostly about interface design, I'm not going to get into the electronic stuff.
Oh, but you should. Like, I'm talking about the complete process. So part of it is like, yeah, people need to tinker with the electronics as well.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, the electronics is done in a CAD software, computer assisted drawing software. I think everybody does circuit boards that way now. There's probably a few people out there that are still doing like photo mask, like the old school, like the way they did it in the 60s and 70s. But they're far and few between. And for the kind of, the kind of quantities that we would be doing, or any of these people that you've mentioned, that you've interviewed already, we're all using computer drawing to do the circuit boards. It's just how that industry works now.
Of course.
But I find for visualization of interface, I like paper. And then another weird thing that I do is I have like a box of like knobs and jacks and buttons, but they're not like working knobs and jacks and buttons. They're like props, I guess, almost. And so I'll start drawing when I'm trying to visualize an instrument or a module. I'll start drawing it on a piece of paper, and then I'll place down I guess they're like dummy knobs or dummy buttons. Like they don't actually function, but they take up the physical space of the button. And so then I can kind of get an idea of like the feel really early on, before we've actually committed to any hardware. I can get an idea of the feel of the spacing of the knobs and the buttons and just all the elements of the user interface, all the things that the user would need to get to in order to play the instrument. And right. I can see that really early on. And if nothing is tacked down or in any way, and if you bump the table, it all falls over. But this is just for like initial visualization, just trying to get an idea of, we want these 8 parameters and we want it to fit into this amount of space. Is that even reasonable? Like, what does that actually feel like? And what's a good arrangement for those 8 parameters that would feel creative and inspiring and not confined and not generic? I never want things to feel generic, but I know that there is advantages to that design approach. And a lot of manufacturers use the generic approach where the knobs are always in the same place. The jacks are always in the same place. The knobs are always arranged on the same grid, and the jacks are always on that same grid. There's a lot of advantages to that. It's much easier, for one, to design the user interface because it's already spelled out for you. These rules are in place. These things always go in these places, and the modules basically look the same from one to the next. They just have different circuitry in them, and that is a valid approach. And but I find that approach to be a little too abstract for me personally. And I've used a lot of systems like that, a lot of modular instruments where they're arranged like that, and it's always felt a little bit disconnected to me. And that's where I come back to like one of the earliest influences in modular design, and that's Don Buchla. And I always liked how each one of his modules looked very different. When you look at the 292 versus, the source of uncertainty versus the 259, all these things, the knobs, the buttons, the jacks, everything was in completely different places. Each module was like its own little solar system that existed in with this universe of the instrument. And so I really just connected with that idea of having each module feel very different in terms of layout, and the layout should reflect the functionality of the module. And so that's why I went that direction of just kind of drawing stuff on paper and just kind of moving things around until it felt like a good layout that made sense for the functionality that lie within, the circuitry that lie within.
That is beautiful. That is really, really beautiful. I'm really curious to see these prototypes, even if you have like pictures that you took to share with some people in the company. Like, okay, what do you think about this layout? Like maybe it's on your phone even. That would be extremely valuable to see from someone like you with so much experience doing these kind of things, because I feel like a lot of students and young designers, young engineers would right away go to the electronics. Right away, like I need to build a thing, and then I can look into the interface. And not that that's not valid. I think that I can imagine that also for you, a lot of times, like inspiration can come from a billion different places. But I think that when we start looking at the interface itself, we should not constrain ourselves to how the layout of the electronics is. Like you should. I remember that there was this interview, I think, in push turn move. That they are talking about how Don Buchla would ask them, how do you want it to be? Just let me know what you want. I'll figure out the electronics. First of all, let's talk about this thing that you're interacting with. This is top priority. And I love this approach because that's really human-centered. You're really thinking about the person that's going to be using it. So if you were thinking about Strega, for instance, if you go back in time, how long did it start? How long ago did you start working on it?
Oh, it was a long time ago. But the thing to understand about Strega is that Strega wasn't necessarily Strega when we started working on it. And I was also kind of going into it a little slowly just because it was the first time that I collaborated with a musician on an instrument. And so I had been collaborating with Tom Erb, for example, on modules. And but collaborating with Tom is very different than collaborating with a musician like Alessandro Cortini, because Tom is also an engineer, and so there's a part of our work process, I guess, that connects in that he's thinking simultaneously about the beauty, but then also the realities, I guess you could say. That's the one problem with trying to combine art with technology or engineering, is that the engineering side of your brain is always going to be seeing, I guess, the technical limitations that arise from certain design choices, whereas the artistic side of your brain is just going to run free. And I think Tom understands that because he has both of those things operating simultaneously, such as myself. Whereas Cortini is 100% artist. And so, I was trying to, I guess, navigate that. I wanted to respect his art. I wanted to respect who he was as an artist and try to present that in the best way possible. But I also needed at the same time to create something that we could actually build at the Make Noise shop and ship out to people to use. If you get my drift, I didn't want to make something that was so hard for us to build that it could not be successfully produced, and someone like yourself couldn't actually get one. So it's like this sort of balance of the two, the two sides of design. I think design always incorporates some level of technology and engineering, but it then also incorporates art. It's kind of a hard thing in that way. Whether it's oh, go ahead.
No, I mean, I wanted to say that there are a lot of constraints that you need to keep in mind, and like if we talk about Strega, Strega is obviously part of a series. So it seems like, oh, hold on, I need to.
Well, to finish, the answer to your question is we worked on it for quite a while, but I don't. The idea of once it kind of became Strega, it didn't have the name yet, but that time period of where we were actually working towards what became Strega, I think, was about 2 years. But Cortini and I had been having conversations about an instrument prior to that. And we would meet, like, say, for example, he just happened to be in New York City and I happened to be in New York City. We would just have a couple of days where we would hang out together and talk about instruments. Or if I was in LA, he's not in LA now, but he previously was living in LA. So if I was in LA, I'd always make sure I had a day off where I could go and just hang out in his studio with him and talk to him about musical instruments. So I guess in some ways that was like us developing a friendship too. But it's like I could try to understand his music as a listener, but then being able to go into his studio and kind of watch how he works and kind of talk to him about the instruments that he loves helped me understand it even more deeply. And then that, I think, gave me the confidence that I could make something that he would be happy about. Because my biggest fear was just, he's an incredible musician, an incredible artist, and he's also a very particular person. He loves what he loves deeply, like incredibly deeply. But if he does not love a thing, then he also does not love it very deeply. He's like any great artist. He's very, he feels things intensely. So I was concerned. I didn't want to make something that he just that he didn't feel wonderful about.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really felt like I needed to understand him in a deep way in order to do that. So that's why I think that's one of the reasons why something like Strega took longer than some of the other projects that we've done.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that someone like him is really specific. Do you think that this like this was a challenge in terms of like creating a product that would be diverse enough, open-ended enough?
Well, I think one thing that is nice about taking time is that we explored a lot of ideas, which I think that was very helpful because, any artist is going to have a lot of ideas. That's what makes them a great artist. But I think also another thing that makes somebody a great artist is understanding what ideas are worth pursuing versus what ideas are, maybe something to set aside for later, or maybe just never. How many people record music that never gets released? I guess in some cases, such as Prince, they're releasing a bunch of music that he probably didn't want to be released. But when Prince was alive, that music was put in the vault. And there was a reason for that. He knew that not everything that he created was worthy of being put out into the world, but it still had to be explored. Mm-hmm. And so I think by taking the time to explore all these different ideas, I think it really helped Alessandro to feel connected to the project because he felt her. He felt like, okay, Tony looked into this and we explored this idea and we explored this idea. And it seems like of all these ideas we've explored, this is the one we should move forward on right now. And I feel like that was really helpful. So we did, there's all these drawings of these ridiculous, well, they're not ridiculous. They're just things we didn't do. There's all these drawings. And if we hadn't done those, one could look at it as wasted time because nothing became of them. They're just stacks and stacks of papers, telephone conversations. And, he was even here quite a bit. Sitting next to me in my office where we were working on these things. And one could look at that as like wasted time, but I don't see it like that. I see it as, we had to go through all those steps. We had to go through all those iterations, all those different ideas before we came to the thing that could work. And so that's, I guess, another reason why it took a lot longer.
Yeah. So that's part of it is features, part of it is interface, or when you're talking about the darlings you had to kill, in which
more conceptual, like what's the concept we're chasing after here? So many instruments have been made. So many modules have been made at this point. Everything that anybody could possibly need to make music is already here. And it has already been here for decades. Mm-hmm. And yet, as humans, we still feel a need for new things. All the time, we still feel a need for new films, new music, new instruments. It's just you can't fight it. It's just our condition. It's just how we are. I wish that I could be satisfied with the same acoustic guitar that I picked up 30 years ago, but I know I'm not going to be. So I've kind of given up on trying to have that level of purity, and I'm maybe more bought into the idea that I'm always going to be needing to change my environment to keep feeling inspired in what I pursue in art. So I guess it's just not simple trying to come up with a new instrument because so much has been done and because we know that so much is already out there. So we really wanted to have a concept that felt worth pursuing. And I think that's what those darlings are talking about. That's what we were kind of going through. Like, do we need this? Do we need that? And what really speaks to us as something that we could release into the world right now and people would be excited about. Yeah.
And that concept, can you elaborate on like, there are a bunch of things that are making the Strega. It almost feels like, not almost. It's a bunch of modules connected together into one thing that would be coherent and made sense on its own. Like this is a thing you can play in a very specific way, or maybe in a variety of different ways, but it's constrained to the combination.
Well, and so that the constraints, the idea of a sort of a complete instrument, that is, I would say potentially I don't want to speak for Cortini, but as I would understand him, that is his number one goal in creating an instrument. He didn't want to make something that didn't stand on its own. He's a big fan of complete instruments. If you look at his studio, for example, he has a lot of different Eurorack systems. He doesn't just have one big wall of modular. He could, but instead he has it arranged into smaller packages that work well together. And that's just how he approaches music. He likes to have complete instruments. So that was a number one design goal. And that was why the Strega ended up being the package that it is. He kind of pointed to the zero coast form factor at one point and said, I think I want to make something in that form factor because I could see it being used with the zero coast. And at that point, the zero control was kind of in development too. And it just made a lot of sense to him. He says, because before we were looking at something bigger. And then at one point, it just became this idea. He thought, I really like the idea of this small package that's complete in the way that the zero coast is complete. It has limitations. It's not everything. It's not going to be the only synth in your studio. It's not going to be the only signal processor in your studio. It's going to be the Strega. And when you want the Strega, you will go to this box and it's there and it's just working. You don't have to plug anything else in. It does the Strega. And so that at that point, we were able to move forward, I think, more when he kind of settled on this idea, like, no, I do want to be in that form factor, that small, complete form factor. But that is one of his main goals, having something that is complete and a sort of singular voice that you would go to, as opposed to something that's open-ended, alternate firmwares, different power-up modes that do, an LFO that can also be a drum module, or, that's not Cortini. But that's not me either, even though I at times get coaxed into it from our customer base to make alternate firmware versions for stuff. I really don't like that. It just drives me nuts to walk up to a module and not have it do the thing that it says it does on the panel. It gets confusing. You're trying to make music and you're like, wait a second, which firmware is loaded on this?
I completely get you. I'm not a very big fan of screens, and I'm also notoriously known for writing my posts and lessons on Instagram, basically saying that like the only menu diving that I want to do is on stuff that I'm not playing. If I want to play, I don't want to touch screen. I just want to play. I knew that about your philosophy because you just literally don't have any screens. And I also think that I read it somewhere that you were talking about it. But an interesting thing that I read that's also related to Cortini is the center bar thing on the
CV bus.
The CV bus. This was also an idea that Cortini had because he just wanted you to rewire everything, hardwire inside. And that this is so beautiful because then it's like the instrument that he wants. He doesn't need all the connections outside. It's just...
I think that, So he was using the shared system on tour, on stage with Nine Inch Nails. And he had this it comes back to, I always think about, the modular can be looked at as something that's constantly mutating and morphing and or it can be looked at as an opportunity for you, the musician, to develop your own instrument. Mm-hmm. And I think some people will put together a patch, a very deep, complex patch that works really well for them. And they will record and create with that patch for weeks, months even. And then other people will walk up to the modular and each time they play it, rip out all the cables and start from scratch. And I think he's more the person that would develop a patch that worked, that did something really special that he was excited about and leave it like that for a period of time. And so he had done that. He had this patch that he used on stage for the show. It was in like a couple of, it wasn't for the whole set. It was just in like 2 or 3 songs of the set where he would use it. And I think his thought was, rather than having to worry about a cable coming undone or something, let's just rewire everything internally. And my thought was, that's a shame, because well, one, would take a lot of time to rewire all this stuff internally. But two, I thought maybe, he might want to change it at some point. And so the CV bus was just this kind of idea, because it had the visual representation and because it was all in the center where it was very clear. He could know that things were patched more easily and that it was set up correctly. But then he could also modify it from time to time, and it would be easy to, I think, he had like a stage person who would set things up. And, with something like the CV bus, it would be very easy to have a document of where things went. And so it did end up working out well for them. I think they had that system on tour for several years with the CV bus, and his person who handled it was always, he never complained to me, at least. He did complain about some other things, which we fixed for them. But he never complained about the CV bus. I think it did make their process a little bit easier. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm getting off topic.
No, but that's cool. That's cool. That's nice. So if you think about the process of designing the instruments or on doing all these iterations, what is is Cortini the only person you're actually testing the device with, or are you testing with more people?
Well, so usually we would test with a lot of people. And but with this Strega, that was much less so. Almost to, I think, some of the folks that work at Make Noise were maybe a little disappointed in that. So I didn't open it up for quite as much beta testing and feedback as I normally would have. And that's mainly because I worked so closely with Cortini on the instrument. And I kind of just felt like, I mean, the level of influence that he had in the design was profound. I mean, he's literally sitting next to me, and I'm like pulling resistors out of the circuit and changing values. And he's, no, not quite enough. A little bit more here, and he's literally just like kind of conducting me as I like make these changes. And I hope he doesn't get upset at I just love his voice. So I developed a little bit of a imitation of it. I don't think
I think this was beautiful. No one would get offended out of this. This is beautiful.
But I think his level of involvement was such that my concern was that in sending it out for beta testing and receiving a lot of feedback on it, people might want to make changes that conflicted with things that he had already sort of guided me on. And so it seemed like it might convolute the process. If this person is saying, well, this does this, and I don't think that's right. And I know that potentially is something that he actually pushed for, he actually guided me in doing. Now I have to go back to him and say, well, these beta testers don't really like this. And maybe it just would have made the process even harder, I think. And so instead, I think the idea was, well, we're going to present this as a collaboration with the artist. And in that, there will be things that are maybe less universal or less common or less to modern spec, like it's noisy. This is what Cortini wanted, it saturates a lot in a lot of different places. Again, this is something that he and I discussed at length, him referring to different circuits in the synthy and the way that they all combined and saturated. And so I think by modern specs, the Strega would be mostly a failure. Most people will, and you can even see it in some of the commentary on the internet. This thing's too noisy. I could never use this in the studio, and so on. And that's fine. Those people should not use it.
It's not for you.
They should use what they are happy to use.
Yeah.
And this is just the risk that you take when you work with someone with a very strong vision and you want to present that vision. You have to be ready. Not everybody's going to like it. It's just not possible. And so beta testing on Strega was a lot less because I just frankly didn't think that we were really open to the level of feedback that we normally are on a beta testing level. The level was more like, okay, I need you to make sure that this works with other stuff, basically. Are you having, is it accepting gates from a variety of gate sources? Is it accepting CV from a variety of, is it, You're not getting weird ground loops, these kind of very most basic level functionality. I don't want to bring a big bucket of problems into people's studio. That's all we're testing for. We're not concerned about the decay. We're not concerned about the quality of the filter or the resonance or anything like that. That's already finished. So I think some of our testers were a little bit, usually they would have more impact at that point, on something like the Mimeophone or the QPOS. So they had a lot less impact at that point. And I think that was a little bit of a struggle for some of those folks that we work with, because they would give me this feedback and I would say, okay, yeah, well, can't really do anything about that. And usually I'm very much so more open to that level of feedback.
So normally with, I'm trying not to go into modular, but like really talking about the standalone things. So I'll take an example, the No Coast, for instance. This would then go into beta testing on which phase of the project, development?
Start as soon as it's like a physical piece of hardware that I don't have to worry about falling apart every time someone picks it up. Initially stuff might be on some pretty precarious arrangements where, you might bump the table and something might stop working. Once we have it on a piece of hardware that is actually functional, and I'm happy with it, the next person in line is usually going to be Walker, and he's the person that does our YouTube channel. He's extremely knowledgeable, and he's been with us for a really long time and understands the vision of Make Noise really well. And so he would be the next in line, usually him. And then the person who helps me to bring all these things up. So that's like when you get prototype electronics, I think in people's head, it's like you put all the parts in and flip it on and it works. And that's never the case. There's always like a struggle to bring it to life. And so the person that helps me with that usually on the hardware side is Devin, who is also our technical support person. So if you've ever emailed Make Noise, you've probably talked to Devin. Mm-hmm. And so he would also be a person who initially would have hands on a device at that point. And so from those two people, I would get very different kinds of feedback too. And having worked with them for a long time, I know what to expect, like the type of feedback to look for from each of them. And then after that, it would go a little bit wider within the company. So pretty much everybody who works at Make Noise is a beta tester. All the folks on the production line, the woman who does all of our shipping is an amazing musician, Meg. She does beta testing for us. I mean, honestly, everyone who works there gets hands on a device before it even leaves the building. We have a little room that I'll set up with everything that you would need in order to use the device, the instrument. And then I'll usually write some questions down on a piece of paper and ask them to maybe comment on the questions or something. And we'll just kind of have a revolving chair where each person will come up and spend a few hours with it on an afternoon and then talk to me about it later. So almost everyone, I mean, really honestly, just about everybody who works at Make Noise would have beta tested usually on any item. And then after that is when we start calling in the folks from outside the organization. And that's always kind of a revolving roster, depending on who has time and who has interest. Some people have been really, really good to us, but then suddenly they'll get a new job and they just won't have the time anymore. Mm-hmm. So like James Sigler, for example, who used to do a ton of testing for us, but then he got a much more demanding job and he didn't have as much time anymore. So I got to find someone new, although it's pretty much impossible to replace him. So then it goes out into the real world and we start collecting data from them and making change. It's just a constant evolving thing until you reach that point where you're like, I don't think we can do any more on this. We should go ahead and plan for the release. Yeah, I know we're outside of interface design and stuff now. We can dial it back into that.
No, but that's when I'm talking about interface. I mean, I'm not really talking about interface design. I'm talking about human-centered design. So, part of it.
Yeah, this is all a part of it. Yeah, because in a case in point, somebody might point to something and say, when I put this module in my system, I found that where this jack was located, it didn't work very well for me. And I might say, well, send me a picture of your system. Let's see what's going on here. It could potentially result in us moving a jack or moving a knob, or another one is which size of knob a parameter gets. Sometimes people will say, I really wish this, I know you don't think it should have it, but I really wish this parameter had the big knob. So on Strega, for example, one of the things that Cortini said from the get-go, we didn't want it to be an oscillator into an echo. We wanted the echo verb circuit, as I call it, to be a part of the synthesis, a part of the core, the heart of the instrument. And so that is a big part of not just where those knobs, where those parameters are, but also what size knobs they got. So you'll notice the pitch, the tonic, and the filter both have big knobs. Classic. We can thank Dr. Moog for that. Let's put big knobs on the filter and the pitch. But then also, what would usually on most synths be at the very end of the far right, with smaller knobs. Think like multiple chord products over the years. The echo verb.
Hold on. If you go this direction, do you mind sharing your screen and just putting the image of the instrument, and we could go through like the flow, like what's placed on the left, what's placed on the right? It would be really interesting to just like understand the design decisions made on the interface itself.
Let's see here. Okay, so if you're looking, you'll see right in the center is the time control, which is something that I think would usually be to the far right, and also would usually have smaller knobs. It has the same size knob as the tonic and the filter. And the reason for that is that we wanted it to be considered part of the synthesis method. We didn't want it to be seen as an end of chain effect, because it really isn't. In the circuit, it's not end of chain actually. And so that's, it actually is where it is in the chain, but also it's in a place that's maybe a little unique, a little strange. And we liked that. We liked it would maybe get people to start thinking more along the lines of the echo as part of the synthesis method, the reverb as part of the synthesis method. And, at one point, this blend control didn't even go to 100% dry. I mean, I actually didn't want it to go to 100% dry because I don't think the instrument sounds too great at 100% dry. The tonic tones section, the Strega tones as it's called, wasn't developed to be used on its own. It was developed to be used within the context of the instrument. And really, honestly, it just, to me, should only go to like, say, 30% dry. But, this was a thing where Cortini and I decided, well, that might freak people out if the blend control didn't go to 100% dry. So we actually ended up putting that in. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, the layout is set up as the circuit is, but the circuit itself is a little bit unique. And so the layout seems a little strange, I think, to some people. And mostly just in that the echo is in the center. But that was Cortini from the get-go. He said he just didn't want the echo verb to be seen as an end of chain. He wanted it to be seen as central to the device. So that's why that is where it is. There is also, there's a lot of hieroglyphic kind of imagery on here. That's just something I like to do to kind of guide people. And it's something that I know some people really love, some people really dislike it. Again, I think if you're going to do something outside of the ordinary, you have to be prepared for some people to like it, some people not like it. You have to just be ready for people to maybe even sometimes say mean things. Like over the years, I definitely had some folks say some pretty mean stuff about these fun synthesizers and instruments that we make. I don't know. People get pretty bent out of shape at times, I guess. But yeah, you have to be prepared for that. My reasoning for it is I just like things to feel a little abstract and a little bit unguided. If I want something that is very predictable, I've got that all day long in my computer. in Ableton Live or other, not that Ableton can also be very unpredictable, but it's it's easy to make something predictable with it as well. I've got that all day long. And then there's also a host of other things out there that you can get predictability with. So yeah, I just like things that feel a little more abstract. I feel like it encourages you to do something you maybe wouldn't usually do. And there's little hints throughout the interface. They're gentle hints as to what you could patch where, but then they're not prescriptions, if that makes sense. They're just hints. They're almost just suggestive. And
would you mind pointing out a few of them just as an example?
Yeah, sure. So where things are is sometimes a suggestion. So like in the far left here,
you could go with the cursor. That's I think with a loop that's actually.
Oh, right. Nice. Well, I guess this kind of helps.
It does help, yeah.
So here you have a touch gateway and bridge, as we call them. And so it's sort of like a source and destination for a momentary modulation. Mm-hmm. And so what I've got magnified right here is a source, and it's a subharmonic, a very low subharmonic of the tonic. And then down here, I have a destination, a gateway, and it is to the activation circuit. So it will activate the time filter experiment, as we say. And these two things are quite close together. And it's one of the more effective bridges that you can create on the Strega. And so I put them next to each other because I think, if somebody just gets a Strega, they pulled it out of the box and it's not doing much, and they're starting to sweat a little. Like, what did I get here? Why did I buy this thing? But then if they just lay their fingers across those two plates, they haven't even opened the manual yet, because you have to expect nobody's going to read the manual. Most people don't read the manual until they have to. That's me. I guess something, plug it in, start playing with it. I'm not going to look at the manual until I think it's broken. So that's right there. They're right next to each other. They just being human, they think, oh, these look like something I can touch and make something happen. They touch it. The instrument, it jumps to life. And that's a great experience. Oh, I've got sound. Incredible. Cool. So those things are placed close together. It's just a suggestion. You don't have to do it, but if you should do it, it will awaken the Strega, and you'll feel a little spark of joy.
Awaken the Strega. I like it. With the name.
Yeah. So things like that, just considering, is it the best place for those two things to go? I wouldn't know. There might be a more organized approach. I'm sure there could be a more organized approach to where all these touch points are. They're kind of scattered in the most ludicrous way. I mean, there is no like seeming order to them. They could be arranged on some sort of grid to one side of the instrument. I actually even had a layout like that at one point. They could be arranged along the bottom or along the top in a very like what's the popular term right now? Knolling, right? Where like things are put together. They could all be in their place, mm-hmm. but they're not. They're scattered. It's in a seemingly random way. But the thing is, there is some thought behind it. It just may not be obvious on first glance why they are where they are.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like if we go back to the beginning of the conversation, this seems like part of the vision of the company. If I like, and it really feels like if I'm evaluating or analyzing designs of different artists or artists in general, you can see how they grow into something and they become more themselves. As soon as they start like not giving a fuck of what people say about them. Yeah. And it really feels like with this, it really pushes it toward like, this is make noise. You should not expect it to be straightforward, but like at the same time it is. It's just it's a different mindset. It's an art piece. You should use it as an art piece and don't expect it to be that specific thing that maybe Moog will provide you. Because if you want that, then you should go to Moog, because they will give you that very specific thing that is very, very clear to read.
Right. Yeah, I have a couple of Moog instruments in my little studio. When I want the feeling of playing a Moog, I'm going to play a Moog. There's nothing
Yeah.
like the Moog is the Moog, and hopefully will always be. And if Moog made something that didn't feel like a Moog, it would upset people. They would say,
yeah.
I wanted a Moog. I didn't get a Moog. It's whether they like it or not. I think they do like it. I would imagine they like it. The Moog is it's almost, honestly, I feel like there was even a point where I can't, I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, but we were just talking about this the other day, where certain items kind of start to define a technology or a functionality. And like when I was a kid, it was Xerox, the Xerox machine.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was a photocopier, right? But we didn't call them photocopies. The teacher would say, go make a couple of Xeroxes of this for me. Or, you might get sent down to the office to make some Xeroxes of a homework assignment or something. That's just what everyone called. They called it a Xerox. Right. For a period of time, a synthesizer was a Moog. It wasn't a synth. Bring a Moog on here. To the point where people were calling other synths Moogs. They probably called ARPs Moogs at times, and they probably called Roland's Moogs at times.
Yeah.
It's a pretty singular thing, and I feel like it's good to, if you've actually reached a point where you've created something that singular and that unique, it's good to just be that thing sometimes, and instead of trying to be something else, just be the thing that you are. And the Moog is the Moog. The Strega is the Strega. It's only the Strega.
Yeah, I think, and it's only a make noise thing. I think that it's a very good way of looking at it. I think that when I'm working with students, I'm always curious. Like I never tell a student what they should do. It's like all my courses are like an elective. You have to choose working with me because I'm fairly specific. And then when I work with them, I just ask genuinely, why did you pick this? What do you actually want to do? And when they just start out, they could be like 21, 22, maybe 25, but they're fairly young. And then they might have some experience with electronics, or they might be just interested because they want to know, they want to try it because they've never tried anything like this. Maybe they're painters or sculptors, and they just want to make something new. And I always find it interesting how they're puzzled by this question at first, unless they're really ballsy. But like they just expect me as a teacher to tell them, okay, so for the next week you need to do this. And instead it's like a conversation. We're talking about their vision, and I'm sort of like a guide just trying to understand, what is your vision? And then I would, that's why I think that this is probably one of the best conversations I had with a designer, because you're really explaining your vision in a very vivid way. And I think it's really inspiring to see how you look at the thing and just say, well, I genuinely find this interesting, and I hope that other people will do too. And it's not like I'm in my own bubble. I am testing it with a lot of people, and I am collaborating with a lot of people, but it's all in the same, like I pick these people because I'm friends with them, or like I really like their vision, and then I want to build something that would, like, we could create something bigger because we do it together. I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah, collaboration is key, I believe, for sure. It's the way that you're going to create something bigger than yourself, bigger than you could have imagined.